What if you could change your racial appearance as easily as you change your hair color? I know, it sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, right? But it's a question that really forces us to look at our deepest ideas about who we are. In fact, this was so controversial, it was the final topic at a World Debating Championship, and that's exactly what we're going to break down today.
Just think about that for a second. Is your racial appearance just a personal thing, something you should be totally free to alter, like your fashion sense? Or is it so deeply woven into society that one person's choice could send a ripple of harm through an entire community? That right there is the huge tension at the heart of all this.
You know, this wasn't just some random thought experiment. This was the exact question put to some of the sharpest young minds on the planet during the World Championship final. So let's step right into that debate arena and break down the arguments from both sides of this incredibly tricky issue.
Okay, so first up, let's look at the argument for banning these procedures completely. Now, you gotta understand, their point isn't just about taking away someone's freedom. It's built on a much bigger idea, that these choices, which seem so personal, can have massive, unintended consequences for everyone else.
This quote from one of the debaters, man, it just gets right to the heart of it. They're saying, look, this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in a world where, in a lot of places, there's this powerful and often unspoken bias that white is right.
So, their whole case really boils down to 5 big points. First, they argue that allowing these changes just reinforces those existing racial hierarchies. It puts pressure on other people to conform. Then, they say it lets wealthier people just opt out of discrimination, which really weakens the collective fight for equality and guts our anti-discrimination laws. And maybe the biggest point of all, they claim this choice isn't free at all. It's driven by systemic racism.
And that last point, this idea of a free choice, brings us to our first major clash. The pro-ban side says, come on, this isn't a real choice when your other option is dealing with a lifetime of racism. But the other side fires right back and asks, well, isn't every choice we make, from our job to the clothes we wear, an attempt to make life better? Why is this one so different?
Okay, so what's the counter-argument? Let's flip the script and explore the argument for choice. Their case is built on a bedrock principle: individual liberty and your absolute right to define your own identity.
And this quote right here, it perfectly sums up their whole philosophy. The idea is simple. Your identity is yours, not your community's, and definitely not the government's. So from their point of view, a ban is basically the state putting you in a racial box and locking the door. So they have their own set of pillars, all centered on personal autonomy. They see this as an escape hatch for people facing real harm. And here's a fascinating twist. They argue it's a way to prove that race is just a social construct. If you can change it, it devalues the whole concept, right? Pushing us toward a post-racial world. And in a total flip of the other side's logic, they claim it's the ban that makes race a fixed, biological prison.
All right, we've heard the opening statements, so to speak. Now let's really dig into where they clash head-on. This is where things get really interesting.
Okay, before we get to the next big disagreement, there's a term we absolutely have to define, one that the pro-choice side brings up: race dysphoria. They describe it as a very real psychological condition, often born from serious trauma, where a person feels this profound disconnect between who they are inside and how the world sees them racially. Whether you believe this is real is absolutely central to the whole debate. And wow, the two sides could not be further apart on this. The ban side basically says, nope, doesn't exist. It's not a thing. But the choice side says, are you kidding me? Of course it's real. They argue that a traumatic event like getting attacked because of your race can cause deep, lasting psychological pain, that this kind of procedure could actually help heal. The next major flashpoint, it's all about a really powerful comparison: gender. The pro-ban side completely rejects it. They say that gender reassignment is for a recognized medical condition, and this is just different. But the pro-choice side leans into this idea hard. They make this incredible point. We only started making real progress against sexism when we accepted that gender is a spectrum, and people have a right to find their place on it. They think the exact same logic is a key to finally defeating racism. And this leads to one of the most mind-bending parts of the whole debate. It's this wild situation where each side is pointing at the other and shouting, "You're the one making race a big deal." The pro-ban side says, if you let people escape their race, you're admitting it's a real prison to begin with. But the pro-choice side fires back that, no, it's the ban that builds the prison, by locking you in a box and saying, this is who you are forever. So you're listening to all of this, back and forth, and then it hits you. This entire massive debate boils down to one single, fundamental question:
what even is race? The two sides aren't just disagreeing on a policy, they're operating in two completely different realities.
So on one hand, you have this idea that race is a fixed historical reality. You're born into a community, into a history, and the mission is to fight for every group to be treated equally just as they are. But then, you have this totally different view, that race is basically a genetic myth, a social construct. And from that perspective, the best way to win the game is to just break the rules. Prove how superficial it all is by letting people change it.
And that leaves us right here, with the final, massive question that pulls this whole thing together. If we let racial appearance become a choice, are we just erasing history? Or are we finally, truly freeing ourselves from its tyranny? As these debaters showed, there are no easy answers here.